Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to the third installment of our STAJE initiative. We're very happy to have all of you here, and I see many familiar faces. A lot of you have been to all three of the programs, or have been to the other two programs. So we see, obviously, that you're really enjoying, and you're getting a lot from it. So I'm sure that today's program will be no different. I'm Judy Steinig, Rebbitzin of the Young Israel at Bayside in Queens, New York, and Associate Director, Community Services of the Orthodox Union. It's a pleasure to greet all of you today. Today's program is a program that's involved with the Orthodox Union, along with the STAJE group, and we're happy to start this program here in Teaneck, and we're looking forward to bringing it to other places. Today's program will feature, well, I'll be calling very soon on Mr. Marvin Shenkman, who is a CPA, MBA, and a JD. In addition to being, now I'm not sure if, I don't even know what all these initials are, PFS, AM, and AEP. He's an attorney in private practice in Paramus, New Jersey, and New York City. And his practice concentrates on estate and tax planning and estate administration. He's the author of 42 books and more than 800 articles. One of the most important things that Mr. Shenkman will share with us today is how we in the Orthodox Jewish community need to plan for our futures. Many times we hear all sorts of different people in financial planning speaking about it, and I'm sure they have good ideas, but those of us, everybody here who considers themselves observant, we have different needs, and that's very, very important for us all to consider. Before I call on Mr. Shenkman, though, I want to thank very much Hannah Farkas, Program Manager, who made all of the arrangements for today, as well as Adina Schwartzman, the assistant in our department, for all of the work that they've done to do all these programs. We're also very pleased and honored to have outside, who was greeting you as you came in, Rabbi Judah Isaacs, who is the Director of Community Engagement. So without further ado, I'd want to call on Mr. Shenkman and for the first part of today's program. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. You know, often when somebody starts, when somebody starts a program, they acknowledge all the well-renowned Rebbeim in the audience, and we have a special Rav here that we have to acknowledge, who's special to me. Rabbi Marciano was the Rav of my yeshiva day school. He pointed out 50 years ago, and just to make sure I felt old and embarrassed, he brought a yearbook from the school showing my 7th grade picture, which I'm not showing to anyone else. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Let me tell you what I've given you by handouts real quick, and then let me talk to you about what I want to do for the short period of time that we have. I've given you a handout that is copies of all the slides that are going to be on the screen as we go through it. I've given you a copy of a newsletter that I have, and if you want to subscribe, you can shoot me an email. There is an article from a magazine called Neurology Now called Building Your Safety Net Now, and that's something that's very important to talk about, because too often people, I think, in the religious community rely on the community and the organizations in the community, assuming that that will provide a safety net for a whole laundry list of things they may need as they age or if they develop a health problem. And it's really not prudent or advisable to rely on the community. It doesn't mean the community may or may not be there, but you need to take steps to proactively protect yourself. For those of you that may have done some more sophisticated tax planning, I gave you a little cheat sheet chart that shows how so many of the tax planning techniques have changed in light of the recent tax law. So those are the materials. Let me tell you why I agreed to do this program and why I think it's so vitally important. When the OU called me, they asked me to do a program on estate and financial planning, retirement planning for baby boomers. So most of you, unfortunately, look a little too young to be qualified as baby boomers, but we'll let that go. And when I thought about it, I certainly said yes. I mean, a charity called, the immediate response is yes, be happy to help. But when I began to think about the program, I realized that financial and estate planning that is done for most people doesn't quite work sufficiently for those people in the religious community, because your needs are different, your spending patterns are different, your lifestyle choices are different. And tremendous attention has already been given, and I'm not going to purport to be so presumptuous as to give you new insights on the pros and cons and methods and the yays or nays on something like organ donations. There's a raft of materials out there addressing all the halachic issues that affect this kind of planning. But what I've never really seen is something that pulls it all together in a practical way that says, what do you do as a member of the religious community to do your planning, and why is it different? And that's what I tried to create. So what I did is I took a template of a program of planning for retirement in later years, as I call it, and then tried to modify it to address many of the issues that I think are unique to the community. And I think some of them are unique. And in the process of doing this, I'm also going to point out one issue in particular that I think is a very worrisome issue for a very significant number of people, and what needs to be done about it. And I don't really think as a community it's been addressed, and I'm very concerned for the future what this means. So I think there's some very important messages. So again, I'm going to point out as we go through this issues that are unique to you, and I'm not going to get into any depth from a religious perspective of what they are, but I want to point out what's different. And all right, just so you know, I'm a lawyer. Here's my disclaimers. Anything that pertains to religious issues appears in brown in the handout to highlight it. So I've added to my general legal and tax disclaimers a rabbinic disclaimer that if any of the information you read you want to rely on, consult the Rav first. Don't rely on me. And I like the little icon I got. He looks like right? A guy heading off to the Kiddush. All right, let's have an introduction. Aging population. And I know they're videotaping me, but the materials are here. 5 million baby boomers a year are going to be retiring. Numbers are huge. There's a lot of homework you have to do before you can retire. And if you don't do your homework, you may pay the piper later. The number of people requiring planning is growing dramatically. Every day since January 1, 2011, 10,000 people a day turn age 65. By 2030, it's estimated that 1/5 of all Americans will be age 65. If you take a look at the percentage of people that are over age 85, it's astounding, and it's growing rapidly. It's one of the most rapidly growing segments of the population. One of the things that most discussions begin with is we have a breakdown of the nuclear family. We have tremendous geographic dispersity, which I guess does affect the Jewish community. And as a result, you can't rely on family, friends, and loved ones. You have to create your safety net. I would suggest that in the Jewish community, perhaps the breakdown in the family is substantially less than the population as a whole. But nonetheless, my parents are now in Boca. They can't take the cold. We have family in 3 or 4 different cities around the country, from California to Detroit to Florida to here. And I don't think that's unusual. So even if the breakdown of the family is not as significant, the geographic dispersity is there, and it also means you have to plan for the same issues. Now, something nobody wants to hear about, but it's a fundamental reality and we need to deal with. Health issues rise as you age. It's not only a factor of age, it's just a factor of reality. There's 130 million Americans living with chronic disease. You can't plan for, is there a question?
Was it possible just to hold the mic, do you mind, or stand closer to it so people can't really hear?
Is that better? Okay.
Maybe just a little bit.
Is that better? Loud enough that Irv won't fall asleep? Okay. If Irv falls asleep, you can kick him. It's okay. There's 130 million Americans living with chronic disease. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart disease. 50% of those over age 85 have some degree of cognitive impairment. 50%. Irv, do you know what I did when I first read that statistic? I called my parents. I said, Mom, get Dad on the phone. I got to talk to both of you together. They were worried already. So I read the statistic. And I said, okay, which one of you has lost it? They started arguing. But joking aside, if 50% of the people age 85 and over have a cognitive impairment, it doesn't happen on your 85th birthday. Poof, you blow out the candles and now you have an issue. You have to start planning long before that because the incidence of this is significant. Now that doesn't mean you don't have the wherewithal from a capacity standpoint to handle decision-making and so on, but it means it's getting harder. That's a reality. There's steps which I will tell you that you need to start taking long before age 80 or 85 to make sure that you're prepared for this. When I throw out these statistics, the first reaction is often, well, it can't possibly be. 96% of the symptoms of those with chronic disease or disability are invisible. We do a horrific disservice to people facing health challenges in our culture in America because we don't really portray it properly. For example, the international symbol of disability is what? A stick figure in a wheelchair, white stick figure in a wheelchair on a blue background. Less than 7% of the people with a disability use any type of walking device. So it's very deceptive how we portray it. So you may have a close friend that's struggling with Parkinson's, with early onset Alzheimer's, with some type of chronic disease, and you may not even know it. Now, one of the aspects of this, which I don't do and I'm not going to really comment on, but it's something that a lot of people need to look into, is Medicaid and elder law planning. You can't dissipate your assets because if you don't have the wherewithal to cover the cost and you can plan so that you can preserve some of them for your family, it's certainly important to do. The mistake that I see most people make is by the time they think about this planning, it's way too late. So that's the kind of planning you need to address far earlier than most people do. And the one caution I will give you, because we're not going to talk very much about it in this program, is that you need to go to somebody who devotes the bulk of their time doing this work. You need a real specialist. I'm a general estate planner. Lots of lawyers may do estate planning. Medicaid and elder law planning is a specialty. You must consult with someone in the state where you're living because the rules differ by state. So if you're telling me you live in Florida and Florida is really your residence, that's where you have to do the planning. Now, when you start to address this planning, every single aspect of planning, every document that you will do, every financial decision you make has a religious implication. So you can't ignore that as you start to go through the planning. Just like you have to tailor every aspect of the planning to your personal needs, you need to address the religious aspects as well. And never assume that anything that you look at, whether it be a document or a planning step, is automatically going to either be secular and it doesn't have to address religious issues. You have to ask the question. Now, the most important step, I believe, to protect anybody as they age, and you don't have to be a Rockefeller, I'm going to help you understand how you can do it cost effectively, is you need to have an estate planning team. And most of you probably already do. You may have an accountant that does your tax return. You probably have a lawyer that did your will. You may have someone that helps you with investment planning. That's not a team, though. If you get them all on a conference call so that all of them are talking at the same time, now you're developing a team. It doesn't take a lot of cost. It takes a focus. And it's critically important because how do you know that you're getting the right answer from somebody? If anybody is ever selling you a product, whether it's an annuity, an insurance policy, or any other kind of product, call your accountant. That doesn't mean it's not good to buy. Get an objective opinion. Let your accountant talk to the investment person. Let your accountant call and talk to the insurance person. Have them check with your lawyer. There have been so many incidences of people losing their wealth, of people being taken advantage of. The phrase, and I don't like it on a political level because it's just wrong, elder financial abuse. It's not elder financial abuse. It's financial abuse of anybody that has any kind of weakness or infirmity. And one of the easiest, cheapest, most profound ways to protect yourself is to simplify and consolidate all your financial holdings so that you have less people, less accounts to keep track of, and get everybody to talk. And if you have a child that you can totally trust that's going to be, say, an agent under a power of attorney, and we'll talk about that, have them involved. Have somebody else that may be more objective. And remember the statistic, 50% of those over age 85 have some degree of cognitive impairment. It may not be significant, it may be mild. Nonetheless, if you get a child or family member or trusted friend involved with the team once a year, once every 2 years, you're starting to create checks and balances that are really critical. Also, you need to broaden the scope of what that team may consist of. So I was talking to a woman today, she's 72, she has no children, no spouse, no siblings. Who's left for her to rely on? So one of the things we're going to do is set up a revocable trust, not to avoid probate. I don't really care about that. but to make sure there's an independent safeguard for her. And one of the things I want to do, because I want to have a check and balance, is we're going to mandate that every year, even though she doesn't need it today, a care manager is going to come into her home, do an assessment, and issue a report to somebody besides the bank plus the bank. This way there's somebody objective evaluating what's really going on with her. So you need to broaden the scope of what comprises an estate planning team as you age to make sure that you're taken care of. And obviously on the last item, you need to consult the Rav if you want things to comport with Jewish law. I'm going to do this quickly. I just kind of wanted to illustrate some of the impact of aging and chronic disease, because this is the kind of stuff that doesn't get talked about enough. You can't talk while I'm talking. If you have a question, you can ask it, but please, thank you. Parkinson's, at age 50, less than 10 per 100,000. By age 80, it's over 200. As you age, the risk and likelihood of developing different chronic diseases, for the most part, is going to grow substantially. And we can skip through some of this. Cognitive impairment with Parkinson's. Not the majority of people, but a significant proportion of people with Parkinson's do develop dementia. Care managers. I have much more in here than we need. It's in your materials. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through this quickly. The purpose of doing this is as we age, the issues that we can confront can be substantial. The traditional approach of going to a lawyer and getting a will does nothing to address the planning you really need. Planning for a will means when I'm not here, I want my kids to get the money. Thank you very much. What a surprise. I kind of assumed you would do that. And if you have kids and a spouse, you probably want your spouse to get the money. It should probably be in a trust. And when your spouse passes away, it should go to the kids. And depending on how much wealth you have and what you're doing, that should probably be in a trust. Nothing very esoteric in that. But for many people, and the topic was boomers as we age and retire, the life expectancy has grown so substantially. In the old days when we watched Father Knows Best or the Cleaver Family on television, if any of you are old enough to remember these things, you know, at those times in life, somebody would retire at age 65, and what was their life expectancy? 68? It was a very different world. It's not uncommon for people to live decades after retirement, and that's something you have to plan for. And keep in mind the prior slides with the growing incidence of chronic disease and other issues. And keep in mind that even if you feel you have kids or family that's close, you may be living in Arizona, they may be living here. You may be in Florida, they may be in Chicago. So a care manager is something that needs to be considered as part of the team. When I have a parent at a distance from a child that cares about the parent, getting an independent care manager to go in and do an assessment and send the report to the kid is a phenomenal way for really a fairly modest amount of money for that child to know that the parent is taking their medications, that their home environment is safe, that there's nobody abusing them. The lawyer's not going to do that. The financial advisor's not going to do that. You all know you need a wealth manager to invest your money or a financial planner. You all know you need a lawyer to do a will. The care manager is really the newest component to the team, and that's why I gave you a lot of materials on it. When an elderly person comes into my office, very frequently, they make that appointment knowing the good time of day or the good day of the week for them, right? As you get on in years, if you develop a health issue, there's times of the day when it's better, there's times of the day when it's not. They may get prepared for that meeting. So what I'm seeing when somebody comes into my office may not be the reality they're facing. A care manager that's trained and experienced in knowing what to look for and what to do goes into the home. I can't tell you the incredible things that we find. And a lot of times it's very simple but profound stuff. Tripping hazards. Well, if you're starting to develop a balance issue because of either simply aging or because of a health issue, you need to address common things that you can trip on, and I often don't see that done. How about an alarm system that calls a remote point rather than just have a local alarm? Having carbon monoxide detectors, smoke detectors, your sense of smell is not going to be as great. Glass detection, things that seem like common sense are often missed. The most vital point is most lawyers, accountants, financial planners, who most people view as what their team is, and that's important, don't have the social work skills or the medical knowledge to understand what the physicians or neurologists, psychiatrists are saying. But getting a care manager in can bridge the gap from the medical world to the financial legal world so that your planning is done properly. No lawyer can properly draft a trust to protect the issues that you face if they don't understand those issues. You can't draft a health proxy to make appropriate decision making if you have a health challenge and no one understands it. I think this is a phenomenal tool to protect people and is grossly underutilized. Most people tune this out thinking, oh, care managers, when I can't take care of myself, we're sending somebody in the house who's going to help me change my linen. No, it's a trained professional to come in periodically and do an assessment of what's going on. I'm going to skip through the rest of this. You have it there, and we'll come back to it if we have time. We won't, so we're not going to. Elder financial abuse, I just want to pause for a minute. Please do not dismiss this. That happens to the other guy. The incidence that we see of elder financial abuse in my office is shocking. And most people think it's the home health aide pilfering the jewelry. And that may be true. But it also can be a child doing really unconscionable things to get money out of a parent. It can be an accountant that you've known for 50 years deciding to name themselves trustee, and all of a sudden they're the biggest beneficiary. I've seen untold creative tricks and obtuse, unexpected things to separate you from your money. And don't dismiss, gee, all my kids are good. I've seen that too. And yes, it even happens in nice families. The answer to the question to protecting you, the answer is an integrated team, and you periodically communicate. You need checks and balances. So for example, and if we don't have time later, I'm going to give it to you now because it's appropriate. Here's a simple no-cost step every one of you can take. If you have more than 1 or 2 bank accounts, ask yourself why. Unless there's a legal or tax reason to have a separate account, consolidate. You can't consolidate personal assets in an IRA. You got to have a separate account for an IRA. Fine. Put them in one institution, have 2 accounts and no more, unless you can justify why. Next, if you named your oldest son as agent under your power of attorney to take care of matters if you cannot, then maybe your next younger child, your daughter, should get a duplicate copy of every monthly statement. This way there's a check and balance. If somebody's ripping you off in the financial world, your daughter will see it. If your son takes over as agent, there's a check and balance to make sure what he's doing is right. And if you want shalom bayit, which everybody wants, putting in the safeguards prevents the enticement that can create these problems. And again, please don't discount what I'm saying. It happens with incredible frequency. And if you really want to avoid that kind of problem, you need to proactively deal with it. Power of attorney. In the power of attorney, you can even authorize or direct your agent to have a health care manager come in and do an evaluation to see what's going on. You can build it into a trust. Okay. What we've done so far is I've tried to alert you to the growing incidence of health challenges as you age, which too often is not talked about because it's not a pretty topic, but it's very, very real. And I've tried to give you some statistics to show. I've tried to caution you about the issues and risks of elder financial abuse. I've tried to broaden the protections you have at really modest additional cost by encouraging you to build the advisors you already work with into a coordinated team. Now let's talk about one of the most basic steps possible, which very few people do. And the power of this is incredible. Nobody pushes it because there's no way to make money on it. But this is probably one of the most important things you can do. Get organized. What do I mean? The excuses I hear are incredible. Put together a balance sheet. When you look at your balance sheet, how many different accounts do you have? I frequently, the norm, will see a dozen or more different accounts at different institutions. The test is simple. I've given it to you. If there's no legal or tax reason to have a separate account, get rid of it and consolidate. Why do you have more than one institution? I can understand because I personally do it. I have bank accounts at a bank. I have all my investments with an investment firm. So that's one extra account, but I just find banks do a better job on things like checking accounts. But the less you have, the less complex it is. If you heed the advice that I have of having a trusted family member or advisor, and if you don't have children or the children are too busy, have an accountant do it. Get somebody to get a duplicate copy of a monthly statement as you age so there's a check and balance. The less and the more organized, the better. Now, what's the title of an account? Frequently, do you know who gives the most estate planning advice in our country? Anybody know? Bankers. Yes. It's not the sophisticated executive vice president that has the background. It's the teller when you go to set up an account. And invariably, the advice they give is horrible. That's not who should be doing your estate planning. And the most common advice is you can avoid probate by having joint name on an account. And what does that typically lead to? It typically leads to the kid that's nearest by that's helping you, they're joint on a bunch of accounts, and then maybe you'll name another kid on another account. So the kid that's joint, that's doing all the work, those accounts get spent down, you die, you spend all this money on a will, which is irrelevant because everything passes outside of the will because the accounts are all joint, and the kid that was doing nothing and didn't care for you gets all the money. That's where that leads. Don't rely on a bank teller for it. A revocable trust. These are frequently sold, I'm using that term intentionally, to avoid the evils of probate. We're in Bergen County, New Jersey. You go to the court, you make an appointment, you take a death certificate and a check, and in a couple of hours you're done and you have letters testamentary. That's the probate process. It's that simple. You don't need a lawyer to do it. You may or you should have a lawyer consult with you about some of the other aspects of it. The probate process is incredibly simple. Living trusts are sold because of the fear of probate. Probate is not the issue. Not planning is the issue. So why do I have a living trust there? Because as you age, the most powerful way possible, I believe, to coordinate your accounts, your assets, to protect yourself as you age, is to have a living trust. I've done it for my own family. It's really the best approach. And if you have the financial wherewithal to do it, I think the most profound and valuable approach is to have an institution as a co-trustee with the family member. Why? Everybody says, well, no, my son, my daughter, they can be trustee, they'll take care of me. But your son may have a full-time job, 5 kids at home, and be preoccupied with a million different things on his to-do list. And it's not that he's not honest and caring, but is it fair to impose on him to take care of these decisions? In most cases, no. But if you have a bank and you have things organized and you rely on professionals, your son can then use the time that he does devote to taking care of you to make sure the important things that might otherwise get overlooked are really addressed. So think it through very carefully. Account management, consolidation, simplification, duplicate statements, organizing records. One of the most powerful things you can do, which is negligible in terms of cost, is to set up your checkbook and your accounts on Quicken or one of those computer programs. Out of curiosity, how many of you have all your financial accounts on something like Quicken? One. You all need to look into this. Let me tell you why. First of all, as you get on in years and it gets harder, it's incredibly simple to set up reminders in the program, so if you forget to do something, you do it. It's incredibly powerful because let's say every one of you should have, without question, a power of attorney. So if you're disabled or incapacitated, your child or your spouse or your friend, whoever you've named, can come in and take care of things. So let's say you sign a power of attorney. What's the first thing the agent's going to ask? What do I do? Where does the agent get information about what they're supposed to pay or do? Well, if you have everything on a Quicken, it's the one I use, and I'm not selling it and I don't get a commission, but if you have everything on something like Quicken, all they have to do, and if they don't know how to use it, they have your accountant do it, all they have to do is look at Quicken. It lists everything you've done. Now, here, let's make this more real. I'm going to show you what I do. We have everything on Quicken, so I can very readily take care of anything and create a budget like that. If something happens to me, someone can see exactly what to pay. What I've also done, and I'm going to get real granular and specific, every single bill in my personal life or my practice, my business, that can go on auto pay is on auto pay. Every single bill that would automatically for my business goes to one color of an Amex, and I got different colors so I can see the difference. Everything in my personal life gets auto billed to the other Amex. And the reason I use Amex over any other card is because they have the most incredible fraud detection, and I've seen, both with clients and myself personally, how astute they are in picking up issues and heading them off at the pass. And if you have a problem where someone sold you something and they're not making good on it, you call Amex, they will aggressively get involved. The other cards haven't. Why do I have everything on auto pay? Well, anything that's not auto-billed to Amex is auto-billed to my checking account. The utility company won't charge Amex, but they'll auto-deduct out of my checking account. Because I now only pay maybe 10 checks a month instead of what could have been 100. Reduced it to a very small handful. Because everything is almost on auto pay. If I get sick, everything just continues along. My paycheck gets deposited to my checking account, everything gets charged against my checking account or Amex, and Amex is automatically paid out of my checking account. If, God forbid, next week you're in the hospital for 2 weeks, what happens? Well, if it happens to me, if somebody has to step in, they can see exactly what they have to do, because it's all on Quicken. But more importantly, there's almost nothing that's going to fall through the cracks because everything's on auto pay. Take advantage of the technology and the computer stuff to keep you independent, to keep you protected. Now, that may sound trite, and most people don't talk about it, but those are the little things that make a world of difference as you get on in years. And frankly, forget getting on in years. If you're young and got a house full of kids running around and you're trying to work and learn and do this and that and the other thing, you don't have time, it's an incredible time saver and keeps you from dropping the ball. Home inventory. I have seen some of the most ugly fights possible over what happens with tangible property. Not stuff that's necessarily of great economic value, but stuff that is emotionally valuable. I had a case a number of years ago where the mother died, the husband remarried, and his second wife somehow ended up with the Lachter from the mother that passed away. That tore up the daughter who assumed she was going to get that when her father died. What was the value of it? $1,000? I don't even know. I'm sure it was insignificant. The emotional pain that caused was incalculable. You're not going to find this when you go on to LegalZoom and do a will, because I don't think they have a Lachter provision. If I'm wrong, tell me. If you buy a book on Amazon on estate planning, I don't think it's going to address how you distribute the Sfarim between your 3 sons. These are things that may seem inconsequential but are significant. Address them. Make up a home inventory. Decide what you're going to do. I'll tell you what my mother did. It was actually brilliant. She actually went to one of the, like CVS, bought these little round stickers and wrote everybody's name on something and put it on the back of everything. Nothing to fight about. It's all done. Investment and financial planning. Okay, I'm getting up to what I think is the most worrisome issue for the religious community as a whole, and an issue that I think is going to be really a problem in the next 2-3 decades. Now, anything you heard to the contrary to what I'm going to tell you right now is just wrong. I don't care where you heard it from. If you go to a lawyer and you're doing an estate plan, wrong. I'll do it because people come to me, but I'm going to tell you the first step in an estate plan is doing a budget. The next step after a budget is doing a financial and investment plan. What are you worried where the money's going to go if you're going to run out of money? I'm not saying you don't need to do all the planning, but the core of what financial decisions you make needs to be the foundation upon which you build your estate plan. I can't tell you how many times people have gone out and bought annuities and insurance and this and that. Where's your budget? I don't have one. Why? Well, how do you know how much insurance you need? What do you need it for? Maybe you need 3 times what you just bought. Maybe you need none of it. I don't know. What's your financial plan say? There's no one that's too rich to do a financial plan, except if your wealth is so dramatically greater than what you have, you'll never spend it down. And that's a funny situation because you could be worth $50 million, but if you're buying jets and boats, your lifestyle can eat that away too. And don't think I haven't seen that. You can't be too poor to budget because what you got is what you got. Now, a really rough, and I mean rough, initial rule of thumb, I usually call it with clients the Marty Shenkman 30-second estate plan. But I guess for you I can demonstrate. Financial planning, al regel echad, right? Okay. Take whatever investable asset, it wasn't that good a visual. Take whatever investable assets you have, your IRA, your brokerage accounts, leave out your house because you're kind of living there, right? Multiply that by 4%. Can you live on that number? If you're getting Social Security, you can add that too. I'd like to be able to make it without that because I don't have a great deal of confidence what's going to be left in Social Security whenever I ever get there. But take the money that you have coming in plus 4% of your investment assets. I'm going to go back now if you want to turn. Can you live on it? If the answer is yeah, no problem, you're probably good to go. Now, that ain't the end of the financial plan, but it's just a real quickie to see if you're in the ballpark. And what I find from the vast majority of people that I talk to that are below, call it $20 million, some huge number, is, whoa, I'm not living on anywhere near that. I can't live on that. Then you got to say, okay, let's refine it. And go back to what I said earlier. If you put your financial stuff on Quicken, not only is it incredibly powerful to save you time, protect you, help an agent that steps in if you get sick, God forbid, to take care of things, but if you want to do a budget and you got the last couple of years of your financial data on Quicken, bam, you push a button, it generates a budget. What I do is I print 2 years of expenses, it takes 30 seconds to do, and then I sit down and I kind of look at what I spent last year and the year before, or this year to date and last year, and I make a guesstimate of what the real number is. And the reason I do that is if you painted your house one year, you're not going to paint it for a long time, so you're going to use a different adjustment for that. If you just bought all new kitchen appliances one year, you're not going to do that every year. You make an adjustment. But you can basically go down the list in 15 minutes and have not a budget, but a real budget. And what I said earlier, if you live the lifestyle in a religious community, you can't use the canned budget numbers that much of America uses. How do I know this? It's the turkey test. Do you know what the turkey test is? You don't know the turkey test? My wife just bought a turkey for Thanksgiving. She came home from ShopRite and said, do you know what they charge for a Purdue chicken, a turkey? Do you know what they charge me for this turkey? It was like 4 times the price. But if you multiply the turkey test over everything in your lifestyle that's more expensive, right? You have different budget numbers than what most of America has. So if you use a canned program you get off the internet or that your financial advisor uses, the numbers may grossly understate what you do. They're certainly going to be very different. So if you have stuff on Quicken and you're spending 3 times, and I don't know what the number is, but let's say you're spending 3 times what the average American family of your size spends for food because of Kashrut and Pesach, right? Now you have real numbers to budget. So if you look at the real numbers, then you can start to evaluate what you're doing. But here's where I see the biggest problem. What assumptions are being used? If you give a certain amount a year to tzedakah, is that factored into your budget? Does your durable power of attorney that your lawyer prepared provide for charity? If you're disabled and for your entire life you've always given to certain charities, why would you want that to stop? You got to address that. You have to tailor the regular planning to address your lifestyle differences. And I don't remember if I said it to you or when we were chatting before the program, but there's a wealth of fascinating literature on everything from organ donations to our responsibility to give tzedakah, to this, to that. All those things are there. But if you don't translate them into the practicalities of the planning and documents, your planning's not going to work. Common budget milestones for many Americans may be getting a kid through college. What's the difference for all of us? While everybody else was saving for college and maybe retirement, what were we all doing? Paying yeshiva bills. And in between paying yeshiva bills, we paid for camp, which was not inexpensive either, right? Yes, we had braces, but we also had yeshiva and camp. And after camp, we had college. And when the average family's done with college, what are we doing? We're paying for a wedding that's got to be a big wedding because the Goldbergs had a big wedding, right? And is it permissible to have a wedding without a sushi bar? But can you afford it? And here's what I find happening. And this is a significant issue, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I'm really worried. When you go out and decide, okay, we have X dollars in the bank, we can pay for the sushi bar at the wedding, and when my kid wants to buy a house, we can give them some help with the down payment. But why does your child need a house that's more expensive than your house as their starter house? I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. Now, if you've done a budget and financial plan and you use my 4% times everything that's investable financial plan, and you can still afford to spend the money to give the kid $100,000 for the house or $50,000 for the house, wonderful. But if you're jeopardizing your financial security to help the child, is that realistic? Now, I asked somebody about this, and they said it's not an issue. And I said, why is that? Well, my children will remember when they're successful doctors how much I strained and struggled to help them financially, and my children will help me. Now, everybody agrees with that, right? Everyone is comfortable with the prospect of saying, son, could you please loan your mom and I $10,000 for our food bills this year? Nobody wants to do that. And God bless you if your kids are so successful and so wonderful and so loving, that they want to shower money on their parents. And that's a wonderful thing. And I wish upon all of our children that much success. But is that prudent to plan for? Is that prudent to plan for? You need to do a projection and a financial plan. And when your child comes to you and says, I'd like to spend Shana Bet in Israel, you need to realistically say, you know, that's okay, but understand, I've been able to allot X dollars for this, and if you spend Shana Bet in Israel, there's got to be some give and take. Or yes, we can help you with the down payment on your house, but the most our financial advisor says we can realistically afford to spend is X. But nobody wants to do that because they feel they want to give everything to their kid. That's a cultural thing. That, I believe, is not a negative, it's not a criticism, and we're all guilty of it, proudly so. But what do they tell you on the airplane, Irv? When you get on an airplane, the flight attendant does a safety demonstration on every flight. And when the oxygen masks fall, Irvin, what do they tell you to do? Put it on yourself first. Why is this different? If you are not going to have enough money to pay for food and basic living expenses, why are you giving your kid an extra $50,000 on the down payment for their home? And as a community, the culture that permits, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but a culture maybe that almost encourages that. Where are we leaving ourselves? And I see this in a very different way than I think almost anybody else. Because there's only really, see, all the Rebbeim think they know what's going on because you come and tell them, right? And your best buddy thinks that she knows what's going on or he knows what's going on because over the herring Irv, right, we tell each other everything, right? It's only the hairdresser and the lawyer that know. And I can tell you that the number of families that I have seen that have put themselves in harm's way financially to make sure their kids have it so much easier than themselves is very worrisome. And what happens in 10 or 20 years? This is a significant concern I have for our collective futures. So, and I actually put it in capital letters. And I think this is an issue that's got to be talked about. But if you do the planning and you say to your kids, I love you and I want to help, but here's the maximum I can do, and my financial advisor tells me I'm nuts to go this far, but here's the maximum, at least you're keeping an eye on it. Now let me give you two trite examples that I think help drive the point home, but don't forget the oxygen mask, it's critical. If you're shooting a rocket to the moon, and your aim is an inch off today, you could miss by 100 miles. So sometimes the little things do make a big difference going forward. The little things do make a big difference. And also, since all of you in this room are young enough, if you start planning today and you get careful today, over the next 10 or 20 years, you can have a huge impact on what you've done. I remember a family coming to me many years ago. They were going to stop work. The wife had stopped work. The husband was going to stop work. They were going to make aliyah. Wonderful. I had them do a financial plan because I demanded that they do a financial plan. And what they ended up doing is the husband worked 1.5 more years. 1.5 more years. I don't know that that's going to, in 20 years, save the day. But when their financial advisor projected everything out, the difference of spending this much money for the next 1.5 years versus saving this much more compounded over 20 years made their numbers look more realistic. And listen, I said to him, if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. If I'm right, it's your future. But once you retire and you sell everything and you move to Israel, how are you going to get your job back? You don't have a second chance at this decision. Do the safer approach. Next example. Life is like a sailboat. Has anyone here ever sailed? Can you sail directly into the wind? Can you aim at your target and sail at it? No. The sail will go like this. You tack back and forth. Listen, your kid's getting married, you're going to spend money on the wedding. Whether it's $1,000, whoa! Yeah, that's realistic, right? Or $100,000, whatever it is you're going to spend, let's say that's off target. Okay, so next year you go back. There's not a wedding, well, maybe there is, but maybe not every year a wedding or a bar mitzvah or something. But if you spend too much one year, you got to go back. You can't live your life on a budget because life happens. I think it was John Lennon's song. Life is what happens while you're making other plans. You've got to be able to be flexible. But if these issues aren't addressed 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it's too hard to do it. Okay, we're going to skip through this. Liquidity, you got to have liquidity for financial emergencies. You can use lines of credit. Asset allocation, do you have a proper asset allocation? One of the biggest mistakes I see across the board for everybody is when they get on in years, they start having all their money in CDs and money markets because they're nervous. You will not survive inflation in the future if you do that. You can't have everything like that. But that answer is to do a financial plan. So let's say instead of saying you want everything in CDs, which is probably for most people absurdly dangerous and far more risky than they think, if you do a financial plan and you see how much you have to grow your portfolio by, if you want to be conservative, you can then reduce your portfolio to the least level of risk and still meet your financial targets. And just like the sailboat, every year you reevaluate. Every year you reevaluate. Income tax planning. This is my son. Come in, come in, come in. Sit next to Rabbi Marciano up here. He's going to show you a picture. Income tax planning. You got to do income tax planning. By the way, and this is not my area of specialty, but it's no longer a joke. If you have assets overseas, you have something in Israel, if you haven't reported it the way you have to report it, call your accountant. There's income tax filing requirements or disclosure requirements you have to meet. Do not fool around. The IRS is really serious. They're not very pleasant about it. If you haven't dealt with it, deal with it. And if you haven't done it and you're in violation of these rules, you have to get an attorney that specializes in dealing with the IRS with this and seriously deal with it. And that's another big concern I have. And by the way, I don't really care how you twist it and how you frame it. You can't pay your grandkids tuition and tell me it's a tax deduction. And I've seen way too much of that. And not only is that going to fall ill for you, but when the yeshivas are pulled into this, it's not going to be a pretty sight. All right, let's skip through some of this. Oops. Okay, insurance planning. So let me just recap real quick. Can I show you the picture? We talked about the need for estate planning. We talked about modifying everything you do to address Jewish religious lifestyle issues, budgeting, financial planning, steps to take to protect yourself. We talked about investment planning and budgeting, insurance planning. And again, this is like a mile wide and an inch deep because my biggest concern is that what so many people do is they'll focus on one or two things. If you don't address the broad range of planning, you're never going to have the peace of mind. You have the world's best will and the best power of attorney, but you don't have a budget, you don't have a financial plan, it's not going to matter. You need to address everything. And if you do all the best budgeting in the world and you don't have proper insurance, that's not going to work. I'm going to run through this quickly. Life insurance. Many people are underinsured. Many people have the wrong kind of insurance, depending on your financial situation, what you're trying to do for your children, depending on your income tax bracket with the high income tax rates we have. If your wealth suffices now, having a permanent insurance product to have the tax-free growth inside the policy is great. Evaluate everything you have. Most people, once they buy an insurance policy, they never look at it again. An insurance policy is no different in a sense than any other investment. Every couple of years minimum, maybe not every year, but every 2 or 3 years, you got to evaluate it. Is the policy performing? Is the company good? Do I still need it? Is it serving my purposes? I can't tell you how many times I see people that are paying life insurance premiums and don't have enough money for retirement. Well, what's the insurance for? To pay an estate tax. You don't have a taxable estate. Why are you doing it? Evaluate it. Property and casualty coverage is so often ignored. You have to have proper liability coverage as well. If you have a home, you have a car, you have to have what's called a personal excess or umbrella liability policy because the coverage on your home isn't enough. I'm going to be a Jewish father for a minute. Toby, you could eat. There's food. Scheduled property. I can't tell you how many people don't realize the value of some of the Judaica that they have, whether it's silver, collectibles, artwork. Have you listed that on your insurance policy? If it's not listed, it's probably not covered. People buy a condo in Florida. Is it covered? Well, I have an umbrella, but your umbrella is here. Have you not got an umbrella policy for Florida? If you get in an accident there or somebody gets hurt on the property, are you covered? You don't want to dissipate your wealth over an insurance policy that could be a few $100s a year. Long-term care coverage. Whether you buy it or you don't buy it, I think it makes prudent sense for everybody to go through the analysis with somebody as to whether or not it makes sense. It's an educational process. I've not personally convinced myself to buy it, but I also share a personal story with you. I've seen lots of clients want long-term care coverage, and they waited until they were so old or so ill they couldn't get it. So my wife and I decided, and it was kind of like tongue-in-cheek, for our 50th birthdays, we were going to buy each other long-term care coverage as birthday presents. While her policy application was pending, she was diagnosed with MS. She'll never get coverage. So this is something that if you need to look at it. If you're not sure, and I think I would put probably 99% of you that don't have it in the category not sure, that's fine. And I'm not saying do or don't, but evaluate it and don't wait because you may not have the choice later. And by the way, look at the statistics. Caregivers, if your spouse gets sick, look at the impact of an Alzheimer's caregiver. So if a spouse has Alzheimer's, the caregiving spouse, their average life expectancy is reduced by about 4 years. That's the stress of being a caregiver. Let's skip through cognitive issues because we've talked a lot about that. HIPAA releases. Everybody knows about living wills and health proxies, okay? And you can go to the OU website. There's other organizations that have sample health proxies. I actually helped Agudas Israel with their form. I'm not sure what is in the OU form, but that's certainly something that will comport with Jewish law. Everybody in the room, bar none, should have it. A living will is a statement of healthcare wishes. A healthcare proxy designates an agent to make healthcare decisions. You should also have what's called a HIPAA release, which is a fairly simple form, and I don't think I've ever seen one that has any religious implications to it. The purpose is merely to authorize a designated agent, a healthcare representative, to access medical records. You're going in the hospital for surgery, there's no life-threatening issue, there's no horrific decision-making involved, but you want your daughter-in-law, the doctor, to be able to see your records so she can interface with the family and the physicians. If you don't have a HIPAA release, you can't do it. So everybody should have one of these in their repertoire as well. Estate planning. We talked about the issues with aging, cognitive impact, disability, and disease. All these things disempower. The planning that we've spent this time together talking about will empower you. It will protect you. So to the extent that disease or aging disempowers, taking the steps, especially a lot of the simple-minded steps like consolidating, putting your assets on Quicken, etc., will all empower you. And by the way, if you get everything on Quicken, for like $59 a year, you can get Carbonite, Mosey, SugarSync, any of these online internet services. Everything is backed up automatically, almost in real time as you do it. You never have to worry about losing records. So it's a wonderful way to protect yourself. What if there's a flood, a fire, you move? This way everything's protected. Most standard forms and legal documents will not address your religious issues. Maybe the HIPAA release is the only thing I could think of that's not. Even when I talked to you about a power of attorney, well, that's financial matters. What religious issues? We're going to talk about that right now. Everybody in here needs to have a power of attorney. You need to sign a legal document that designates someone and empowers someone to take care of legal, tax, and financial matters if you can't do it. And it doesn't have to be something bad. You went to Israel for a month to visit a grandkid that's there. What happens if you get an IRS audit here? Who has authority to deal with it? You need a power of attorney. Now, there's all sorts of different issues to address, but from a religious standpoint, there's always loan provisions. Well, what about ribas? The standard power of attorney won't permit an interest-free loan because that's really violating your financial need. The fiduciary responsibility of the trustee, of the agent as your fiduciary. So why not address that? I talked about the issue of tzedakah. If you are traditionally giving every year to certain charities and you want that to continue, and why wouldn't you? If you're disabled, you need to address it. Most forms don't address it. Another issue. It's very common in the religious world for people to be supporting a parent, an aunt, a child. I don't have any statistical data, but just from my 30-plus years of doing this, my guess is that it's far more common in a religious community than in a non-religious community to have people helping other family members out. So if you're disabled and you're helping out your adult children or an elderly aunt, if your document doesn't say that the agent has authority to help these people, legally they can't do it. So you can't just sign a standard form. These changes aren't a big deal to do, but you need to tailor them to work for you. Living wills and healthcare proxies, we've talked about it. Of any document you sign, there's probably nothing that has more religious issues to address than a healthcare proxy. You cannot sign a standard form. You cannot sign a standard form. Please don't just sign a standard form. I can't tell you over the years, it's calmed down, but there were periods of time where there was a committee at Agudas Israel. They used to call me when they would have these horrific situations where somebody signed like some internet form or some form they pulled out of a form book, and one of the kids is not religious, the other kids are all religious, and they're trying to do whatever. They're trying to cut off mom's medical support, and the other kids are fighting it, what can they do? And what I used to do for them is I would read the documents and try to find a way to reinterpret what was in the document to prevent the kid from doing what was violative of the religious wishes of the parent that signed the document. The family trauma that this creates is incalculable. Please don't sign for the third time a standard form that hasn't been tailored. If you want to sign something quick and you don't want to spend money on an advisor, at least go to the OU website. They said they have a form. Aguda has a form. I'm being politically open-minded and, whatever you prefer. And I don't think there's even, whatever you do, just don't sign a secular standard form. Agent selection is vital. Who are you picking to make these decisions? Are they really having the same religious sensitivities that you do? If you pick a child that has a greater religious level of observance, will they do what you want to do? And I'm not saying that to offend anybody, but you have to ask these questions. Every family has varying degrees of religious observance in it. Every family. Every child has different degrees of emotional sensitivity. So let's say you have a child that you know will understand what your perspectives are on these decisions and make them. Do they have the emotional capacity to really deal with it? Now, let me tell you something that's kind of heretical. In 30 plus years of doing this, other than some of these tragic cases from Aguda, and one or two cases that I've seen, it's very, very rare that I've seen these kind of very difficult situations arise. So I think oftentimes what happens is because this is so loaded with religious challenges and concerns, I got the high five from everybody, high five back, that the focus goes to this and a lot of the other things we've talked about that are very, very important as well don't get addressed. So when you want to address, let's call it the Jewish perspective on estate planning, absolutely you have to draft and sign and prepare an appropriate healthcare proxy and living will. But don't leave out everything else we talked about. Revocable living trust. As I said earlier, as you age, I think that is one of the most powerful tools to protect your lifestyle and your integrity, your financial security, and everything else. Again, don't just sign a boilerplate form. There's provisions in these documents that need to be addressed to support your religious lifestyle. Let me give a comment in general here about distributions and trusts. One of the trends in our country, and I said it earlier because I do believe it's one of the most protective things that anybody can do if you have the financial wherewithal to do it, is you name an institutional trustee. It is incredibly more common now than it was 5 years ago for people to name a trust company as a trustee of a trust. If you name a trust company of a trust and you set up trusts for children and grandchildren, will an institution understand the concept of paying for yeshiva? Will an institution understand the concept of paying for a Jewish summer camp? Will they understand the concept of a year in Israel, which is very common? I think what they will understand is doing the financial analysis to support what distributions they make like they do for everyone else. If you don't provide at least a letter of instruction to the bank saying, I want my children and grandchildren, or whatever the case may be, to have yeshiva education, to have Jewish summer camps, to be able to have the opportunity to go to Israel, I want you to pay for that. If you don't communicate that, the typical trust document will not do so, and you're going to find yourself your family will find themselves in a very awkward position. So again, there's no religious overtones to those decisions, but the implications to a religious lifestyle are incredibly profound. Let's wrap up. Charitable planning. We talked about the use of modifications to a power of attorney to support your charitable giving. Charitable remainder trusts are a phenomenal tool. It's kind of beyond what we have time to talk about. Charitable lead trusts, let me just give you one example, and then we're going to wrap up, okay? So 2 minutes. Here's the Jewish version of a charitable lead trust. Now, nothing unique about the charitable lead trust. I'm going to explain what it is so you understand, and then I'm going to tell you an interesting Jewish variation. So a charitable lead trust is as follows. Let's say you have a large taxable estate. Your wealth is very substantial, and you want to save estate taxes, gift taxes. You can set up a trust, and for the next, say, 15 years, you put $1 million in a trust, and for the next 15 years, the OU will get 7% a year from the trust. And I'm not sure those are the right numbers with the current interest rate environment because the numbers always change. But that'll basically create that the net value at the end for tax purposes is virtually zero. So you've shifted this money out of your estate with no gift tax. But for the next 15 years, you can have your child designate which Jewish charities get that $70,000. And at the end of the 15 years, whatever's left in the trust, and if you invest it prudently and professionally and so on and so forth, if you outperform, and I use too high of a number, call it 5%, at the end of the 15 years, whatever money's left there, and in many economic times, you could pay out an amount that would largely reduce the value to close to zero for gift tax purposes and leave the $1 million plus at the end for the child. So you could set this up where your child could then give money to the charities that he or she chose, and then in the end, the money goes to the child basically as a retirement plan. So the way we would do this in some instances is while this trust is established, perhaps each year as the children are in day school, the child could use the money that that trust has to pay to make donations to fund the schools that their children are in, not to pay tuition, but to help enhance the facilities of that school. When the kid goes to a yeshiva high school, they could donate there. When the kid goes to, say, YU, they could donate there. And by the time the kid's done with school, the child now has got a retirement plan, and the estate and gift tax costs have been eliminated. And in the interim, they were able to be a macher at all the different schools and help the various yeshivas where their kid was at. So there's lots of creative ways to do planning. Let me summarize. Every one of you needs to get the basic core documents in place. Powers of attorney to address handling tax, legal, financial matters during disability, healthcare proxies and living wills to address healthcare issues, a HIPAA release so that someone can access medical records, a will to provide for distributions. The will should include trusts, and you may even want a revocable trust to protect you as you age. Every single one of those documents has a myriad of issues that you need to tailor to your unique circumstances. And if you don't do that, you're not going to get the results you want. You have to be very wary of signing or engaging in what I would call standard planning because of the unique nuances that you face. When you do financial planning and budgeting, which is the core of all that planning, again, you have to tailor to reflect your lifestyle or you won't get the result you want. Okay, we're done. Okay.
Would they email me questions?
Yeah, do you want me to answer quick questions now or no?
We have time now for 2 questions. Does anybody, and after that, if anyone has further questions that are not covered by the ones that we're going to take now, if you want to email them into the OU, we will get them to Mr. Shenkman and then get you back your answers. So does anybody have a question they would like to ask right now? Yes, in the back.
An irrevocable trust is a trust that, generally speaking, can't be changed. And that's not really fully true, but a revocable trust is typically done to manage your assets while you're disabled as you age to avoid probate. An irrevocable trust is typically done for asset protection or tax planning. So if you live in New Jersey and have a $2 million estate and you're trying to save some of the New Jersey estate tax, then you may want to set up an irrevocable trust to transfer assets to. The federal estate tax exemption, and I didn't really get into this because I didn't know how many it applies to, except for my last example on charitable lead trust, is now $5.25 million. So as a married couple, unless you have over $10.5 million this year, there's really no federal estate tax. So I didn't really want to get into that because I think the other issues are far more critical. On a lower level of wealth, like I used an example, $2 million, you may want to save New Jersey tax, and the irrevocable trust may be part of the planning. But that's really a whole nother lecture, and what I tried to focus on was really the human element, and in particular, how to tailor your planning to address Jewish issues, because I truly don't see enough of that being addressed. And my biggest concern, which I shared with all of you, is what I see is spending patterns that are going to put a lot of people in harm's way. Yes?
Could you just quickly go over that 4% thing again?
Yeah, that was the Marty Shenkman 30-second estate plan.
Right.
Take your balance sheet, because you need to put together a balance sheet to do planning. Ignore your house for a moment because you're living there. But if you have, let's say, an IRA and you have a savings account and you have a brokerage account, add those up. Let's say that's $3 million of cash securities, savings, not counting your house. 3 million times 4% is $120,000 a year. Can you live on $120,000 a year? If the answer is no way I can do that, then you got to really go back and be careful and reevaluate what you're spending money on.
Is that because you're saying that you're going to get 4% out of all investments average?
You're not going to get anything on average. No year is average. Over the long term, the number that has been determined, and it may overstate or understate, there's a whole lot of discussion about it, but a ballpark number, if you want to keep that $3 million intact, because if you're age 50, you could live 35 or 40 years. And in financial planning terms, that's forever. If you spend more than 4%, you're going to jeopardize the principal. There's going to be some years where 4% will eat into the principal. There'll be other years where 4% will be less than the growth in the principal because you've earned more in the stock market. The stock market's up whatever this year. But over the long haul, that's all you should be able to spend on a pot of money and keep that integrity of that principal. Now, if you're 75 years old, you could spend more. But if you're like most parents, you're going to want to leave that $3 million to your kids. 4% is kind of the benchmark. But what I find when I go through my 30-second estate plan with most people is their jaws drop. And that's why you have to go back to the drawing board and really evaluate what you're doing. Because if you're spending 7 or 8% of your principal, you're not going to make it. And you know what?